Hey everybody, hope everybody is doing well. Well, I know this is not a very exciting topic to really talk about, but I can tell you this, that as a result of all this shutdown and our failure to diversify our economy, well, guess what? It's pretty likely that tax increases are on the way. Although I did look at some of the recent bills that's coming along the way. There's rumors that they're going to try to repeal the commerce tax, but we'll definitely have to see what's going on. However, you know the powers that be and all these empty promises these politicians keep doing, not to mention a lot of their campaign donors, which really explains who they work for. Both parties, believe it or not, it is likely, or I wouldn't be surprised, that we were going to have another tax increase, just like what has been seen in 2015. Now, as you can see here, I copied and pasted this article from the Review Journal because obviously if you want to look at the article from the Review Journal, you have to pay, which I don't want to. But I managed to copy the text and read it from word to word. So let's just look up and down and see what's going on. Every session of the Nevada legislature earns a nickname, and it's going to be ugly for 2021. And not only the state is confronting a general fund budget of at least $535 million for the coming 2 years, some of the factors will determine how the state balances budgets. So the state lawmakers are looking for the past economic downturns for lessons, drawing plans to make up the least painful cuts to important services and praying economic recovery at least a year off. Nobody's under any illusions. The coming legislative is not going to be pretty. And again, I hardly trust any of the people in the assembly, even though some of them I probably have as Facebook friends, but it's not going to be easy. Maggie Carlton, the longest serving woman in Carson City. This is not the way I want to end my legislative career, believe me. And this senator from Reno agreed. It's going to be like a session like on other. Every session's unique, but this one may be more unique than others. And this is kind of reminiscent of 2011. I remember when they were cutting the budgets. Big part of the problem is that lawmakers have no control over things that will determine Nevada's fate. First, there's special elections in Georgia, which already passed. But if Republicans win, they remain in charge. And they, of course, by the way, are begging for federal money. So again, look at this. They did all the shutdowns. They did all this hype over a virus that, again, there's no evidence whether these shutdowns really affected anyone or not. Because they oppose all of this aid to many of the states that have been reckless and irresponsible, especially like California. And we're absolutely dependent on federal aid. Yeah, well, here's the problem though. Where's the money going to come from? They're just going to have to keep jacking up the national debt. And if there's a high velocity of money, there's going to be high inflation. And if this continues to jack up, well, there's a lot of foreigners holding our treasuries. Certainly that's something you have to consider. And not to mention, if this continues, we may not pay the interest on our national debt. Short of federal aid, it's going to be a really stark session of the budget. It's going to be devastating if none is provided, since the bulk of the Nevada's general fund is made of K-12 education, health and human services, including mental health services, public safety, prisons. Well, look, here's the problem though. First of all, and I know this is a very taboo subject to talk about, but a very large portion of the people who use our K-12 schools are largely children who are born out of wedlock and/or children who are born to largely non-citizens. And the same goes with health and human services. So remember, a lot of these services, nevertheless, are going to go to non-citizens. And they know it, but a lot of people can't realize this. All right? That's a sad truth. And this is probably one of the reasons why some people may argue why they rigged these recent elections. So the governor has asked his state agencies to trim the request by 12%. If federal government doesn't come with additional stimulus, the impact of state programs will be dramatic, and 12% will be very ugly. And I think it's going to be more. And by the way, I think even if they try to get federal assistance, I think there's going to be a lot of lawsuits. Because a lot of these states don't want to give money to state governments that have been very, very reckless. But it's not just whether the federal government assists states with fiscal problems about the large part of the shutdowns that came as a result. It's when. Lawmakers are charged with passing a balanced budget in late May. Federal aid that comes later won't be part of the session's budgeting balancing process. Timing is going to be very super critical. Canizaro. And of course, as you know, Canizaro just supposedly won by just a few votes after they shut down the county. Maybe there's something fishy going on. And then there's a final piece of the puzzle, the pandemic. Everybody agrees that Las Vegas won't return to normal until tourists feel comfortable traveling here. Convention business events return and limits on businesses are lifted. For that to happen, millions of people will have to be vaccinated, and the numbers have to fall significantly. Do you think I'm going to accept the vaccine? Heck no. Don't ever bother. Because, again, you go back like 20 years ago. We had 9/11. They said, they hate our freedom and liberty. They reduced our rights, and we still have these ongoing wars. And do you really think we can trust the same media, the same establishment that's telling us what's going on? Give me a break. Nevada is no stranger to fiscal problems. 9/11, Great Recession, and of course they don't learn their lesson. We did it before, but we can do it again. I don't really know about that. Sometimes you can at least admit that you may not recover the same way as you're once used to. They must create jobs, create more revenue, and not cost the general fund for everything. And this guy, Steve Yeager, seems like a very shady guy. By the way, his district covers where I live. And one of the reasons he wins is because the opponent does a pretty crappy job campaigning. Carlin said the budget should be built with Nevada families in mind. Everything has to be family-centric. Involves people, money. We are down to basic needs, and we know what people need to survive. Budget cutting without cost is going to be very difficult. This is a guy named Jeremy Aguirre. I see him in many media interviews, even documentaries. I don't really know much about this guy, but I'm just curious to know why they keep interviewing him. But I've thought about interviewing him just to get an analysis and bring my viewpoints. He notes that the legislature adjourned in June 2019, having approved a 9.1 general fund. When the pandemic hit, the revenues turned to about $8.1 billion, forcing the legislature to meet special session over the summer to cut some more budgets and drain the state's rainy day funds to make other changes. And as you know, of course, a lot of that money went to the stadium. Think about that. The Economic Forum has projected $8.5 billion in revenue, but they request a total of $9.67 billion in spending. The budget reduction brought in budget in line with $8.5 billion figure. The impacts are far-reaching, I've seen. So, before I go on, and I want to make this very, very clear, okay? I think one person who needs to be held accountable and one person who has done more damage to the state is former CEO Jim Murren. Not to mention, he sold company stock before the Mandalay Massacre. He's the one that resigned in February, which probably knows he had insider information that something was going to happen. All right? That's really, really the sad part. And of course, he was part of the COVID task force, so why don't we raise taxes on him? Other than cutting budgets relying on federal aid, the only other way Nevada can add to its general fund is through taxes. And I know there's going to be a lot of opposition, but by the way, if they raise taxes, I believe, and I made this in one of my predictions 2 previous videos ago, that there's going to be threats for recall. And it says any bill that raises taxes has to require 2/3 votes in both houses. Well, a lot of people argue that nevertheless, maybe the politicians have changed because there's been a lot of opposition from both parties to raise taxes. He says the last 2 major tax increases came after the governor, Kihuen, and Sandoval called for them. But this time, tax talk is already in the air. And the Education Association called that will raise the sales tax 1.5 percentage points and would raise the gaming taxes for 9.75 revenues, $250,000 more each month. Well, here's what I do like about that. They're being fair because they're not just going after the little guy. They're actually going for, well, the large casino mega giants. Now, if they raise sales taxes again, pretty soon we're going to have a 10% sales tax. And when that happens, man, it's just going to feel like we're in Chicago. The legislator has 40 days to enact those tax measures written. Otherwise, they will appear on the 2022 ballot. Well, they say they won't oppose either. They've mentioned that they need for more school funding, and sales tax in particular is going to seem ill-fated. Balancing the budget on the backs of the folks is struggling is not a good idea. In addition to making these tax proposals, during a special session in the summer legislature passed a trio of proposed constitutional amendments challenging the way of mining industry in the state. The legislature could pass these resolutions in 2021 and have that appear on the 22 ballot as well. And Tom Roberts pointed out these initiatives mean the taxes will have to get some attention from the very start. We're going to talk about it no matter what. Roberts, who flatly predicted that neither tax proposed by the teacher will be approved by the legislature, is skeptical of the mining tax effort because it will have an impact on the industry. He's also skeptical of additional money for education budgets until a new funding formula is implemented. Before you throw money into the issue, you will really have to look at education as a whole. Rural Nevada feels under assault. And I think because of this, there might be signs that they may want to split the country. He said, predicting higher than usual voter turnout in the 22 traditionally Republican areas into the state, defeating potential mining sector, and they're going to be out in spades in 2022. But Yeager replied the proposal on such mining tax is a matter of equity. We just want to make sure everybody's paying their fair share. Well, sounds reasonable, but maybe this is the reason why California became the way it is now. It's pretty ironic. So they say, just a little bit more, balance the budget, and before you know it, you're basically in a black hole. Okay? And by the way, so far I haven't read anything about property taxes, and I haven't heard about income tax. Income taxes are going to be very hard to pass. And if it was that easy, Washington State would have an income tax by now. But they have a lot more other taxes. We just want to make sure that everybody's paying their fair share. The tax initiatives have appended a traditional legislative playbook. Propose a parsimonious budget, tinker with the funds for the first part of the session, then unveil the stark reality of what the cuts would do to our end, when the conversations about taxes to heat up. Now, as you know, the last two tax increases, 2003 and 2015, they didn't happen really in recession years, okay? So, usually ugly things happen in the least time when people expect it. Canizaro said the makeup of the legislature, Republicans gained House in both Senate and the Assembly in November's election. It won't mean that any budget includes taxes would have to include Republicans. We're doing everything what we can to produce a balanced budget, he said. We can't do this alone. Other lawmakers have declared opposition to any tax increases. Annie Black, the guy who replaced that other assemblyman, what's his name, who would go along Boulder City, Mesquite, for an example, wrote in a newsletter to constituents in December that she would not consider raising any mining or any other taxes, as a matter of fact. Nevada continues to lead the nation on unemployment, and they're unable to process thousands of unemployment claims dating late March. Many businesses have gone out or going to the edge of bankruptcies. Non-essential jobs have been permanently lost. You're going to raise taxes, and you're talking about workers in business? I don't think so. She is one of the 6 members of the Assembly who signed the Americans for Taxpayer Reform Protections Pledge. And there's many other ones out there. Richard MacArthur, Andy Matthews. So you look at these other area ones. That's probably why lawmakers like Yeager say they're skeptical a compromise might be reached. I'm sure we're hopeful that's not out there. Thus far, nobody has mentioned another issue, property taxes, which have been capped by the state since the heady days before the Great Recession. Since the recession, however, caps have kept property taxes from rising and have kept local government revenues low. This is one of the reasons why they raise sales taxes, perhaps, but I think property taxes are going to be hit. However, nevertheless, you have to keep in mind if they raise property taxes, it's going to backfire because, well, it's going to bring downward pressure on home prices. And all these speculators in the real estate market, the home builders, they're probably going to struggle as a result of all this. In the next 2 years, Aguero, 1.1 billion taxes would have to be subject to abatements, 400 million which should have gone to K-12 schools. Although the budget will dominate every discussion in Carson City, other issues will come up. But what it seeks to be the most controversial issue, redistricting, will have to wait for a special session in the summer. The federal government won't be able to get new census number until late session in the earliest, but the delays removed a huge political hot potato which otherwise could affect the negotiation over budget and myriad other issues. The other issue is economic development, which has taken the importance of other fiscal crises which are almost followed by calls to bring businesses to Nevada, which will create jobs, generate more revenue, and keep the state from suffering from the next tour disrupting event strikes. Well, I think there's going to be more because to blow up the real estate market and the financial system is going to be another shoe to drop. However, the push for diversification is usually forgotten when the economy returns to normal. And we've heard this about 10 years ago. Now, yeah, we're getting more diversified, but not enough. In fact, some people may argue that, well, the casinos and the hospitality, it's creating a climate where other companies just don't want to move in. So if they collapse, then we may see other companies come and replace it. He's working to make a plan to make Nevada a global destination for esports, video gaming. That's a serious industry. He's working with the casino industry and UNLV on that project with the goal of having weekly events which can draw hundreds of thousands of people. Well, good luck. Along the same lines, Brooks says he's passionately expanding energy economy in Las Vegas, electricity storage, transmission, and electrifying transportation in the state. Brooks says Nevada is uniquely suited to become a center for solar, wind, geothermal. Geothermals I have a much favorable view of, and the proper infrastructure that can export electricity to other states. Well, how about more manufacturing, for heaven's sakes? And best of all, the industry will displace existing jobs and cannot be exported to other states or other countries. Even a portion of those taxes for those projects built on those lands that's not generating much tax revenues for now are waived to induce development, and the state will still get more revenue than it's receiving currently while it's fostering a new industry. Makes sense. And you talk about there's not enough money to provide large-scale tax incentive that has lured companies such as Tesla and Apple to Nevada. Robert says during his days to the police, he retired there as an assistant chief. Two teams received the budget closely and found that 2.5 million to 3 million potential cuts without affecting services or personnel. While those amounts are not significant, given the department's overall budget, it was still money that could have been applied to critical needs. Another critical issue is elections law reforms, which made permanent changes during special sessions, which saw ballots made to all active registered voters. But there's no evidence in Nevada at the federal level of voter fraud. Yeah, well, they said that about Russian collusion, and we know that when they mean reform, they can usually mean that things are going to get worse. Robert says there's room for reforms, including cleaning up the voter rolls and outdated voter registrations are removed. And there were reports of duplicate voters. Well, my goodness, this is real. And this is going to backfire very badly. I mean, I can see justice coming very, very soon. A new hope. A new legislative session calls for new comedy and bipartisan cooperation. Ideas are generally discarded by deadlines that winnow that the bills are eligible for consideration. The rules for Carson City heavily favor the majority party, which near total control of which get hearings and votes. The election of 2020 may have changed dynamics slightly, as neither party has supermajority or superminority either. But the sheer budget gaps and the consequences of solutions related to it and the stakes for the residents and the state depends on the schools and health up for a session cooperation is not just an ideal, but perhaps a vital necessity, a situation in which rigid ideologies of both parties may give the way to uncomfortable moments. As Roberts puts out, and quite worthy of being enshrined on a plague of a wall in an assembly changer, aside from the portrait of Abraham Lincoln. Well, at some point you have to govern. So, look, I just have to point out that I just don't really think this article is explaining everything. I think they're going to be doing a lot of hidden things behind people's back. It's going to look pretty ugly. And I think with this ongoing tension and civil war and everything, you're just going to see perhaps a lot of protests in the Carson City legislature. It's really what I see this turning to play out. And if they do something really, really ugly, I think there's going to be a lot of threats for companies and even people to leave the state. Because, folks, I don't even think we're going to even be close to becoming California. Nevada just doesn't have the vibe nor the resources to become a state like that. So, anyway, what do you guys think? Do you think there are going to be tax increases? How do you see this really, really playing out? Do you think we can finally diversify? Or do you think just Nevada in general is just experiencing a collapse? What do you think? So, anyway, I think if they really start cutting funding for schools, I think they're just probably going to keep people learning and working at home because there's just not a lot of money to operate the public schools. That's just what's really, really the sad part. Because when you think about it, a large part of the budget goes to public schools, and there's a lot of cost-effective measures to do it. So, what do you think is going to happen?